Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Today, the player I've got at number 2, Lachie Neale, has made his way right towards the top of the tree this year in the 50 Most Relevant. Joining me on this episode to talk about him, I've got the legendary man himself. I've got Kane. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very good, MJ. You're nearly there. You've nearly done it. You're 49.
One more to go.
Player. No, he's a great player, this guy. Yeah. He might be someone that, in Dream Team, he's actually, maybe a better player than he is Dream Team player. But we know SuperCoach is his format. It's been his format for a long time. And he still can scale those DT heights that make him elite. We know 2020 was almost the perfect season for him with that reduced time on ground and him playing so much time on ground.
That's right.
He was just an absolute beast, rewarded with the Brownlow Medal, absolutely deservingly. And it's just crazy, isn't it, MJ? When you have a Brownlow Medal, these dips afterwards for so many different reasons. It's amazing just some of the misfortune. Tommy Mitchell had a broken leg. We know Lachie Neale, who we're going to talk about today, just had so many little injuries and things pop up that just didn't give him any sort of continuity. But
no, that's right.
Hey, the reason he's number 2 is because what an opportunity for us as coaches to get a guy at the absolute peak of his powers.
Yep.
At this price. It's quite extraordinary. And I think something that's quite hard to overlook, which is why I'm sure you've got him so high on this list.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Look, 28 years of age, midfield eligible, even with a frustrating stop-start year last year, he still gave us some really nice scores. It was 145 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team against the Essendon Football Club, while in SuperCoach, same game, same best score of the year too. It was a 157. Both aren't near his career scores though. You got to go back to 2016 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team when he was playing a part of the Dockers. It was a 169 against GWS. Well, just a couple of years back now, 2019 in SuperCoach, 190. Yeah, the boy's got some ceiling. His average last year was a 99.8 in SuperCoach. It's in that format that he's certainly the most desirable pick. And he's going to set you back at a price point of $543,200. While in AFL Fantasy, a 94.5 means his price for us just under $800K in AFL Fantasy, just marginally over in Dream Team. Kane, it was the year that was never really got going for Lachie Neale, wasn't it? We knew through the preseason he was being hampered by this calf injury that was, he couldn't quite get to his full potential. Then when he did get into the AFL season, it was a lower back complaint. And if you had him at the start of the year, you could just see it wasn't quite right. The way he was entering his contest wasn't quite there. Then we got a patch of games where, Lachie's back. And then unfortunately, in round 6, gets an ankle injury early. Credit to him, soldiers on after what we thought might have been out of the game in the first 5 minutes. Out for a while with the ankle. And then when he gets back, it's not quite full Lachie Neale mode again, but it's the trending sign. And so if you're on him at pretty much any point last year, it felt like you were on a roller coaster.
Yeah, well, that was the thing, MJ. We had him, let's go back a step. We had him coming into last year, top priced.
Yes.
Like we know how massive 2020 was. We've spoken about how the shortened game time played a role in making those scores even bigger. We know for a lot of part of the season, like the bulk of last year, he was a 130 plus equivalent in DT and over 145 average in SuperCoach. Like that's just how monstrous a year he was having in 2020. So we come into 2021, the price is through the roof. There was some quiet games in the back of 2020. There was a tag game
some
that brought it
tags
down. There was, you hate to say the word value, but there was, a dip in form and a dip in that dipped his price, but it was still a monster price. It was an insane price.
Career high.
And I think that was something that people thought when you got a guy so high, it becomes that approach, doesn't it? Do I start with him and just take away the headache of finding a spot for him? Or do I try to get him in a bit cheaper? And the little thing that we would have loved to have known coaches that started him was he had that back complaint that he was dealing with
That's right.
at the start of the year. We didn't really know too much about that. We we'd heard a little bit that it was maybe niggling at him, but I don't think we quite realised the extent. And maybe that extent was shown in the first 2 rounds where he averaged 60 in DT across the first 2 weeks and he averaged 75 in SuperCoach. And it became a point, didn't it, MJ, where we thought it's decision time. Because for those coaches, you still had the value.
That's right.
And knowing what we know now, clearly the injury was a big thing in round 6. But if you jumped off, it was the right call. Because while he showed glimpses, and in that next 3 weeks prior to the injury, there was some scoring. There was a 103, a 96, and then the big 145. So maybe it was starting to turn in those coaches' favour that held. But unfortunately, we had that injury. We had that time out of the system. You had to get off. Yeah. And again, people considered bringing him back, and it was just on again, off again, wasn't it, in that back half of the season? You know, if you touched him last year, you probably do have a bit of a sour taste in your mouth, especially, you know, if you didn't own, I think that's the thing, MJ, isn't it? If you didn't own him in 2020 and you missed that monster season where the people that had him were like, oh my God, this guy's good. And people that didn't have him, particularly in SuperCoach, were like, this scoring format's broken because he was just so good every week. But last year, if you jumped on, it was just impossible to get the timing right because there was no continuity. And by the time he maybe started clicking, it really was just the last 2 weeks of the season and he'd missed around 21 games. So I think what we liked was that qualifying final against Melbourne, wasn't it? Because
that's what's got people talking. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The reason it's got people talking is not only was it a 140 in DT and a 152 in SuperCoach, it doesn't affect what he's priced at because it was in the final. So he got this hit where it's like, oh, that's old Lachie Neale. That's 46 touches.
He's back.
That's 5 marks. And remember, MJ, that game, you know, the D's got on a roll late. There wasn't really much to sort of play for, was there, for Lions? They knew they had another opportunity next week against the Bulldogs. And even in a game like that was, honestly, in my books, probably one of the games of the year, maybe alongside that Melbourne-Geelong game. Like that was just a pure finals special. Everything you dream of in a final. And he had a 99 in DT. The SuperCoach scores dragged down, but it's dragged down by the occasion, wasn't it? There was so much back and forth. We know that SuperCoach, if you're not really contributing in that key moments late in the game, and in that game, you know, it was the Bailey Smith goal. It was those type of moments that got that little bit of a boost. But I think what we liked is the movement. Back to Lachie Neale, covering the ground, inside, outside, tackling, marking, space, clearances. And then you hear this news now of a fit preseason, and not just a fit preseason, like
firing
and
knocking
an all-time preseason. And again, that's what people have known Lachie Neale for, that you hear coach, you know, a Ross Lyon talk about it, like this work ethic, this ability to always want to get better. And that's why you love him, and that's why we always say, like, that's why he's so consistent. Like, he doesn't let you down when he's going. He just gets it done, doesn't he?
Every single week. And even though he has shown moments where he is susceptible to a tag, what he does have is just an elite athletic work rate. So that even if he does find himself in a challenging moment with a tag, which he had last year and the year prior, is he still pushes his way through all of these elements. If you're curious at what some of these splits are, because we know the injuries impacted his year, we're looking for these glimmers of hope. Where could he be back towards his scoring best? We saw some of them between round 3 to 6. Kane mentioned these already. A 114 average in Dream Team and Fantasy, a 110 in SuperCoach. Between round 12 and 23, again, still finding his way back from these injuries and stop-starts. A 104 in Dream Team and Fantasy, a 109 in SuperCoach. Those AFL finals, pretty much just under 120 average in those 2 games, albeit boosted by one big ceiling game. But that's Neale. Is he'll pop these 140s, 150s and Dream Team and Fantasy, and then just give you a solid 95 to 105 along the way. But in those formats in the finals, an average of 122 in SuperCoach, just under that marker. 9 Dream Team and Fantasy tons last year, 2 over 120, 7 last year in SuperCoach, 3 over 120. We don't need to go really too in depth into that 2020 season because we know that's the unicorn season. But since he's been at Brisbane, because I don't think it's relevant to go back to what he's done at Fremantle, other than to make this one extra point. 121 in SuperCoach, 134, 99. These are his seasonal averages. Brisbane Lions for Dream Team and Fantasy, the 104, the unadjusted average of 98 In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, if you want to play the adjusted averages, it's 122. I don't think it's pure and fair to do that, but that is what it is. And then last year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 95. Here's the thing. We have got multiple years of data at Brisbane and confirmed in the other formats that he is a bulletproof 110 guy in SuperCoach. I mean, bulletproof. And in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, he is one of the most reliable 100 to 105 performers. So here we have a player that is offering supremely good value at his price points, maybe 10 points per game of value at his kind of secure level. In SuperCoach, if someone said he's going 120, I wouldn't doubt that at all. So there's potentially 20 points of game per value there. I think 10, maybe with an upside of 15 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team is as big as he goes. He's one of those safe guys that gets it done. We will get the odd tag game where he stinks it up for us. And most elite premiums have that, where they get one game where someone just gets them. But for the most part, their durability, their consistency gets them over the line. I think the question is this, Kane. I'm very, very keen on your take. Across the formats, this is his ownership percentages. 51 in SuperCoach, 49 in Dream Team, 34.8 in AFL Fantasy. I think we probably need to look at him in each of these formats differently. SuperCoach, is it too simplistic to say it's the easiest gift we've been given in the midfield and you're crazy to go against him? Is it that simplistic, or is there some more elements to it?
I don't think there's a bigger gift. No, there might be someone that's equal, but I think 20 points is what you're under, MJ. And again, 20 points at what he's priced at and what that average is, like that's a captaincy guy pretty much every week. So I think SuperCoach, it should be 100% of guys. I just don't see, if you're taking him on, you're really needing and expecting those tagged games and those quiet games to come
early.
The hard thing is sometimes, as we always say, the timing of it, if they come early and the price hasn't moved, you actually don't get to capitalize on those low scores. So he's such a beast that for me, I'm already getting value. Like, why am I trying to get happier than happy there? Like, I've already got him priced at 100. What am I hoping for? A couple of quiet games and he's priced at 95? Like, just take him. The flip side is the thing. If he goes 150,
which he can do.
Now you have to really get your act together before it becomes a guy priced at 120 or 130. Yeah. So for me, he's an absolute no-brainer. DT, I get in the sense because you're more of a guns and rookies guy in DT. I know the format's changing. It's changing that you've got more options. So maybe you do have to consider a few things that in the past you wouldn't, because the way he's priced that with his history, he is the guy you love in DT. It's an underpriced premium that can match pretty much nearly every midfielder in the comp, bar usually 3 or 4. Like, he's in that sweet spot range. And how many years have we had success with those guys that are priced in the mid-90s and you just all you're wanting is that 10 to 15 point bump, and you're there. They become your N8 for the season, no problem. Well, you find it, if you get 100K, you can do something else, and they're matching, the guys that were 110 players last year. So I really get the pick. I think in AFL Fantasy, it does seem like a high number, like 35%. That does surprise me. And we always know with these ownership percentages, and I know some people do track all this, which is great once the season starts, but it is a misleading sort of number, isn't it?
It can be, absolutely.
What people who listen to the Coaches Panel and other fantasy podcasts want to know is, I'm not competing with everyone. We know there's 100, 200,000 players in these games.
Depending on the format,
What we really want to know is let's say, what's the top 10K? Of the top 10K coaches, what's that percentage? Because I think the percentage would be 70% Neale ownership
in some formats,
in these formats. With like the people that, the people that listen to us and the people we want to play against, the people that take it really seriously and want to do their best. That's the one you've got to think about. And I think when you look at Neale, again, 95 feels like the floor. Like, look at what went wrong last year.
Everything went wrong for him. And yet he's still going at 95 in AFL Fantasy and 100 in SuperCoach. So for me, I go, where could this go wrong? He repeats the 2021 season which we know it is injury alone that is the cause. And we must presume health because he is healthy. And if you look back through what he's done in the totality of his career, he's missed only 2 games prior to 21. He's missed only 2 games since the start of the 2014 season. So you can't build this narrative of developing injuries, because I go back, calf, and ankle, all 3 unrelated injuries, all 3 in isolation from each other. And all we can do is take him and the Brisbane Lions at face value for what they're showing us, which is he's fit and healthy. There is not a planet on the world Chris Fagan is experimenting with him outside of this midfield role. We know the damaging components of what he could be. The challenge I think coaches have is going, like you said, SuperCoach, you just pick it. There is no plausible reason you ignore a potential 120
It's too
guy.
cute, isn't it, MJ?
It's too cute.
It's too cute. You're overthinking it. It's one of those ones, if you start, and we all do get to those points on certain players where we go, oh, but what about this? You sometimes do need to, as Rids would say, go for a walk.
Yep, come back.
And just go, okay. Like for me personally, I don't like touching my team until about a week before because I don't want to have these things in my head. I want to just, I've got the rookies. Okay, that gives me the template and I want to build from here.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, I think it is a good thing almost around this time, MJ, is we're 2 weeks roughly from the first.
Give or take. Yep.
Yeah, like there's going to be some scratch
games.
matches in between, but the ones that that are actually, official AFL, the one game they get now, that's about 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
Not a bad time just to put your team away for a little bit.
Yeah.
We're always going to be reading the news. We're always doing that.
Something might pop, sure.
Yeah, stuff's ticking over. But I think this is a guy that if you're not picking him in SuperCoach, it's overthinking. I think AF is where it gets tricky because you've got to deal with value everywhere. Like in SuperCoach you do and DT you do. Sure. And obviously it's becoming more important with more trades. But in AF, 5 points here or 5 points there, that money you save, all of a sudden it can be an extra premium. And if you get your strategy right, it can be the difference between, it's such a tight format, that one, isn't it, MJ? You make one wrong move, it's just incredible. I think in the past, coaches in DT and SuperCoach, they sort of like that approach of, these are the 12 guys I want for the year. Here's a bit of fun with some mid-price or I might have a little teaser with these guys, see if they pop. And you're only really playing with 10 guys in your team you're trying to improve upon on the field.
Yeah.
Whereas we know in AF, you've got to be a little bit more aggressive than that. You've got to be looking at runs. You've got to be, finding those text walkers of last year that are a quick cash grab. And
that's right. 3 or 4 week.
So that's where I think, and my point with that is Lachie Neale, for me, is around a 105 guy. I feel like there's a little bit either side. If there's an extra tag game, it's probably closer to 100. If he has an extra ceiling game,
110.
It's closer to 110. But I don't see him over 110. I think I see him around 105 just with the way he plays. And again, we've spoken about this a lot. It's his other scoring columns for points. They're not massively high. We sort of
possessions and nothing else.
Yeah. So we sort of said that, 10, we like to see 10 between marks, tackles, goals, and Lachie's never been that. He's been more of an 8 and 9 type of guy. Now, we know the reason he can get away with that is he's a ball magnet,
That's right.
Along with Mitchell and McRae, he's a volume accumulator. So that's why in those tag games, MJ, isn't it? That's where you get this variance.
That's where the 60 comes.
Yeah, because if he has a 22, there's not a Jack Steele 10 tackles. There's not a Lachie Whitfield 10 marks.
That's right.
That's why I think for me, it's 10 points upside. So I'm playing with this number of 10. I'm going, can I find 15 elsewhere?
That's right. You look at an AFL fantasy, you go, for 100,000 less, I've got a Yo. For 150,000 less, I've got a Matt Crouch. And again, you might be able to fit all these guys in, and that's perfectly fine on your structure, but others might be looking at it. I want a Jack Steele, who we revealed the other day. I want another premium midfielder that we may or may not be revealing tomorrow on the 50. And you go, all of a sudden, you can't fit all these guys in. And that's
the problem, NJ, isn't it, too? Yeah. It's like 10 points. We said 10 points, right? But also, it's different. You can't just say it's 10 points, this player to this player, because you don't want a 50 guy going to a 60 because that's not enough cash generation.
No, it's
not. But if you have an Uber going plus 10, like that's what Jack Steele did last year. He went from, a 110, 112 sort of guy to a 122. And now he goes from it'd be nice to he's the best player in the comp.
Yeah.
So that's why I say you've got to weigh up, is there a 100 guy that goes to 110? That's
right.
where I'm saying you want him over a Neale.
Yes.
Is it better to have a guy that's 60 that gets to 75? Like, that's why it's so fascinating, is because it plays a different role. At Neale's price, he plays the role. If he goes 10 points up, he's a problem you worry about in the last 6 or 7 weeks of the season.
Correct. And I think that's what people look at him about in these formats and go, oh, I've got enough areas of the ground in AF or DT that I'm playing around with. I know what I'm going to get. And so I might get a 3 or 4 week stretch of a 95, but I know I'll get a 4 or 5 week stretch where I'll already get a 110 win 15. So therefore, at the buy, I'll adjust. At the buy, I'll make them. And that's and
that's the thing, MJ, isn't it? Like, would you rather an 80 guy that gets to 95? Or would you rather
a Sarong
goes
type,
from 95? That's the thing you've got to work out. And typically what dictates those type of decisions, and Sarong is the perfect example for this, is, okay, it's Sarong v Neale, but then it's also the money you save from Sarong. Does that go on a Cam Rayner's head? Does that go on a rookie's,
does that get you a Sicily
rookie?
up to
that's why this game is so fun and so great to talk about, is because all of a sudden you spill off that and it opens another door of things you've got to consider. So that's why I say 10 points is a great number, because it gets him on the fringe of holding for the year and being content with that, especially with his durability. But it also leaves that little bit of like, is it enough? Like,
and I think that's that friction point. But he's so relevant because we know across the formats, he's reliable, he's consistent, he's dependable. But in DT and AF, coaches will be flipping over him all preseason for those very points. While in SuperCoach, it's lock and you walk away through it. He is a highly relevant player. It's why he sits
exactly.
at 2.
That's it, MJ. Like, it's the relevancy of him, isn't it? Because in SuperCoach, as I said, he's just an absolute weapon. He dominates the format.
Just walk away,
He's just exactly. But in AF, he creates. The question that comes to mind just for me, as I said, is it enough?
That's it.
Is 105 enough with some of the stuff that these other mids can do?
Yeah.
Is there someone cheaper that can get close enough to him? Or is there, as I said, is there a guy that, can you find that Jack Steele of last year? Like, obviously we all want to find the Tuke Miller.
Of course.
We can find the Tuke Miller, but is there a guy like a Jack Steele that you go, good year or very good year to, great year? Is it a Mills? Is it a Brayshaw? Is it this guy that's more expensive than him that goes up another gear and becomes, that real must-have? So that's why Neale is just so relevant and so fascinating, because it's not really going to be answered in the preseason.
No,
MJ.
it's
not for him. It might be answered by the guys you're weighing up that ricochet off of this. But
yes, Cascades,
he's fascinating. But what about draft? I know we love finishing with draft.
Draft for me, look, I think previously you'd be paying an M1 price point for him, especially after the 2020 year. I think in SuperCoach, you can still get him at an N2 space. People will still.
MJ,
yes,
no.
I can see it. I can see people going, Oliver, Petrarca, Bontempelli, Miller. I can see a world.
No.
But if you want him, you have to go an M1. Like, if you want him. But I can see in some drafts, I know people do this in SuperCoach. I'll get Grundy, I'll get Gorn, I'll get this, I'll get that. And all of a sudden you're in the second round and you've got him where you shouldn't. I know it's crazy.
If that's the case, I'm begging then, if that is the case, I'm begging for, if a 10-team league, I want pick 10. If you're telling me I can get this guy, I can get him there, because
you can.
What's sickening then, and it maybe just shows how even it is McRae's a gun, Miller's a gun, Steele's a gun. But it's that close with a guy like Neale. Like, he's that good, MJ, that
I know.
You're almost saying then, if that's the case, whatever falls to you by then, you're happy with. You can't split Gorn, Grundy. We know those forwards that we have in DT that we love, they're not as translatable to SuperCoach.
Yep.
Dunkley can. We know what peak Dunkley can do.
Yep.
So that's blown me away.
I think it's honestly crazy, but it's there. It's a position later in Dream Team.
Is that because of the average? You see the average.
They see the average. They want the other positions.
All of a sudden, you explain away the 134 so much, and maybe people don't even look at the 121. Yeah, I believe you. I believe you, but it does shock me.
I think it's there. It does shock me too.
DT is tricky though. That's a genuine. tricky one.
A couple more spots later, but he'll slide again because, again, it all depends where you rank him. Do you rank him as the 105 or the 110 plus guy? There's going to be some variance anywhere from M2 to M3. He won't slide past people's M3s, but he's a fascinating player to look at.
There's some guys above, isn't there? Because especially now, you've got Keys. People love talking themselves out of a guy that all of a sudden is a really good player if you actually watch him. Mills has got a bit of an injury, so I can see he's rising, and he's obviously a great name.
And all it takes is it depends where you're drafting. If he bangs out a brilliant pracky game, well then he'll rise again. And we know this is what happens. So timing is everything, but he'll be one of the first handful of midfielders picked in SuperCoach again. Where in that first handful or two is open for people's kind of choice. Probably in the second to third dozen is where people are doing again, all plenty of variance through there. Hey, Kane, as always, mate, appreciate your work on the 50 most relevant.
No problem, MJ. Nearly there. Keep going.
One more to go. One player. You should not be shocked who he is. Why? Why is this player number one? Good news. I'll tell you about it tomorrow.